Let me do a sound check again. My sound's coming out of the computer versus the
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Mhm.
Morning, Linda. We'll give a few minutes, see if other folks are joining us. If we want to shoot out of a binder, I hate to send thing here. Morning, everybody. We'll start in just a second. Just giving a couple more minutes for other folks to join us. I know it's always back to back. So trying to come into a training right at 11 o'clock again. So in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. Maybe some other folks are able to join us as we go along here. So, good morning to everybody. My name is David Knight. I'm the Executive Director for Cal CAPA, which is the California Community Action Partnership Association. So, as many of you know, we are the state association for our 60 agencies across California that represent all 58 counties and different cities along the way. We're just always excited when we have the opportunity to come together with folks to specifically talk about different issues. But this is one of my favorite ones, which is busting myths about tripartite boards. As many of you know, many rules and laws and regulations tend to kind of be built out of urban legend. And so this is one of those conversations where we can try to bust some of those myths that tend to occur over time. And when, you have new folks come in or folks may have had an idea or a thought that all of a sudden turns into rules and laws and regulations simply based on the idea that this was something along the way. So we first of all want to talk about is that we understand kind of the heart of community action is the tripartite board. So even since our original construction, one of the things that we talk often about is the term maximum feasible participation. And that was coined actually from President Kennedy at the time. And obviously, we know what occurred there. But when Lyndon Johnson came in and announced at the State of the Union address that he wanted to start the war on poverty, he used that phrase and the understanding of that as we form community action. And again, the thought about maximum feasible participation is breaking down each one of those words. It's not just about trying to say that we engage with individuals of low income, it's that we empower individuals of low income. And that's the heart of our structure of how we created these agencies. And it was very unique, and it still stands unique across the nation. And many of you probably serve on other nonprofit boards, or you've been involved in other types of nonprofits and community organizations and community government style of things that have advisory boards that oversee them. And this is what makes us extremely unique is kind of that shared structure of empowerment and what really allows us to do our work. It's kind of the philosophy of what you do for us without us is not truly for us. And so in making sure that we empower that. So a lot of our rules and regulations are based on that idea that really formed us at the very beginning. That CSBG law has been reauthorized at the last point in 1998, but keeps a lot of those standard principles that we offered. Now, what's really unique about it is if you actually read the CSBG law and go through it has some very simple, very direct things that have to be followed, but it's also very simple. A lot of times things can get complex as by the time it gets down at the agency level. And we'll talk a lot about that. I'm really going to address today what the federal law states. Things can change as we come. Obviously, for the most part, we represent California. We also have Region 9 and, of course, across the country. So we're going to talk mostly about today what is the federal rules and try to be very specific into that and not so much what are the California rules around that. What is the here in California, it's ran by CSD and what rules may have put in place, but what does the federal law state? Because I think what that allows us to do is first and foremost, someone else may be watching this from a different state. And so we don't want to get into state specific things, but also it's important to set the groundwork as to what the federal law says, because that gives us the ability to advocate alongside our states to say, let's not make it more complex than what the federal law requires. So we'll start at the very beginning and just kind of hit on the structure at a glance. And a lot of this will be very elementary for a lot of folks, but if you're brand new to community action, this will be really, really powerful to understand. Overall, the one thing that one of the things that makes us extremely unique is our third structure of our boards. And we want to be very specific as to what that says. So every CSBG eligible board balances these three sectors. And the first sector we'll start with there is the public sector. And what's really important about this is that it says exactly 1/3 should be elected public officials or persons they formally designate to serve on their behalf. The key word there is exactly, and that is a big point of interest. I know here in our state, just a few years ago, we changed some of the language in the state code to make sure that it read exactly like what the federal law states. And it was kind of a running joke for a while because we had to define what a third meant quite a bit. We needed some more math professionals in the room to narrow down what that meant. But once we got to that point, we were able to understand that, and the reason for that is because of this sector, the public sector says it should be exactly 1/3. And that's important too, because when you're looking at your board structure, what does that mean? Well, that means your board has to be divisible by 3, right? You have to be able to divide it by 3. So you can't have a 20-member board because you can't divide that by 3 to make sure you're meeting every sector exactly correct. And that's the one part that does it. So you can have 21, 24, 27, 30, 33. If you get in that high, that's probably a lot of board members, but some boards are very large. And so the important part is especially if you're a private nonprofit, that board needs to be divisible by 3 so that you can make sure that the public sector has its exact representation in that way. The next sector we'll talk about is the low income sector, and we'll go through a lot of myths around it. But the key for phrase on it is at least 1/3. So at least 1/3, which means that it could be more than a third. And that's obviously by design as well, because we want to ensure that folks that are representing the low income sector have some of the biggest voice and have the potential to be the largest voice at the table on our board. So again, it's at least. And so the remainder is, so if you go over that third on the low income sector, then you may have less that are private. Again, it can't be no more because obviously your private can't be more than a third, because that would mean that your public sector or your low income sector would be less than their 1/3 their access to. So this is kind of very key into that. And we'll get into some of the myths around these different sectors, specifically around the public sector and the low income sector. Private sector has a lot more flexibility and how you can do that. And one of the myths I don't think I put in the presentation about the private is that it has to be executives of organizations, or it has to be very specific organizations. The flexibility on the private is really for you to find what you need on your board. At some point, you may need real estate experts. Sometimes you may need banking experts. Sometimes you may need legal representation that can not be your representation, but at least have a legal knowledge to help your board during different times in your existence. And so that's where you remain to have a lot of flexibility and can really help create that board in that sense. So let's jump right into the presentation. Now, first one is the 1/3 requirements are just goals to work towards. I hear this a lot when I'm out training agencies. Well, the 1/3 is just a good idea. It's what we should be striving or what we should be shooting for. That is not the case. The 1/3, there are legal minimums, not aspirations. Exactly 1/3 of the board must be elected public officials. Like we just said, that 1/3 must be democratically selected representatives of low-income residents. Falling below either floor is a compliance finding. So this is one of the biggest findings that we have that we see from our state office and we see across the country, is that we have people saying, oh, well, we're attempting to reach that, or we're having difficulty, but we don't always keep the 1/3. Sometimes it moves around depending on what board moves. That can't happen. You have to keep the one-third at all times. You have to be able to be divisible by one-third. I know there's a lot of bylaws out there that have flexibility that'll say we can have up to, let's say, 24 members, and we won't have any less than 21. Well, the important part is that you're able to keep that compliance and be very specific at the time. And we're going to talk about a little health check at the very end. And one of the things we're going to mention is talking about reviewing your bylaws on a constant basis, but also ensuring that you review your board roster. And that's where a lot of folks they'll have individuals come and go, and a lot of times you have people when you have moving parts, and maybe one represented a certain sector at one time and representing another sector at a different time. It's making sure that you always do a health check on your board roster so you know exactly who's serving and what position they're serving in. Because a lot of times, when you have that monitoring, the folks come out and they'll ask a board member, they'll say, what position on the board do you serve? It's not very good when someone says, I'm not for sure what role I'm representing. So that's a very, very big thing. You want to make sure that it's clear and that folks understand what portion of the one-third they represent. And a good way to do that is to always ensure that you have a yearly board orientation. You're very clear to folks what position they're in. And part of that is explaining the overall one-third. So a lot of times when our board members come in, they're excited about serving on the community action board, but may not know the history and the importance of the one-third aspect. And so making sure that that's always met. And then our board members are working with us to achieve that as well is extremely important. So next myth number 2, anyone passionate about fighting poverty can fill a low-income seat. Right? Oh, this individual in the neighborhood has volunteered at the food bank for a long time, or they represent the food bank for a long time, or this person's always involved in the school board and representing individuals of low income, or they are a great champion for individuals that are low income. We think they would be a great asset to our board. That's a great way to recruit and to go out and find representation. But these seats require a documented democratic selection process. So again, it's you can go out and find these great people that have long championed for individuals of low income across your community. But the important part here is being able to have that documented democratic selection process. So you should have a policy. It doesn't have to be a part of your bylaws. I always suggest that you keep the bylaws as simple as possible around this, and the bylaws can reference that policy around the democratic selection process. Again, it's not an election. Doesn't have to be an election, but it has to be a democratic selection process. The number one thing around this, and I just had this conversation this week, is making sure that you can document how individuals of low income selected this person. That's the important part. The issue around this is where we're, again, creating empowerment of individuals that we serve. You have to be able to go out and select these individuals. You have to be able to go out and show that these voices are coming to the table to select this representation. A couple other myths around that is, how does that work? Well, one of the things is that do you have to take the person that is selected by a group of individuals? No, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later on one of the myths. As the board, you do have the final say on that. But at the end of the day, you have to be showing, and this is a process, this is a culture that needs to be created throughout the agency, that you're constantly recruiting, that you're constantly engaging with individuals below income so that you have the voice of them, you have them at the table, and they can be very documented to show how you filled that low income seat. And again, this is another one of the kind of the issues across our country, across our state here, is not necessarily who the person is. We're never attacking who the person is sitting in the seat. It's how they were selected. And oftentimes we do want to build our boards with people that are engaged, people that are there for the right reasons, people that can really benefit us as an organization. All those elements are important when you're looking for people to serve on the board. But I would try to say the most important part is, how is that person selected? Who is appointing them to the board? Who is selecting them to be on? That can be a lot of different ways. And as stated again, commitment matters, right? It really does matter that your people are there for the right reasons. But at the end of the day, it's realistically that you're opening up. And it's always challenging ourselves to say, are we continuing to look at our communities as our communities shift, as our communities change, as the individuals of low income may shift and change? Is that we're constantly looking at that to make sure that we are continuing to reach different races, reach different ethnicities, reach different types of people throughout our community that may have fallen into poverty or maybe moving into our communities. And again, constantly challenging how we look at that, how those folks are selected. So myth number three, a low-income sector member has to personally be low income. I know this is one of the biggest ones that we hear all the time. I want to make sure this is very clear. This myth is both for agencies, but also for funders. If you're watching this, you're going through this and you're saying, hey, they don't have enough low-income people on the board. So to be very, very clear, an agency doesn't have to have anybody that's actually low income. They just have to be selected by individuals of low income. And oftentimes it can be very difficult. And we do want to put a lot of things in place, whether that's travel vouchers for traveling to meetings, whether that's providing childcare while folks are in there. And this can, again, be for all members, not just the members that represent low income. It's ensuring that they have the tools and we've put things in place that can actually truly give people an opportunity to serve. As we know, a lot of our members that are low income struggle with having the time to invest in volunteerism, right? So maybe they're working multiple jobs, maybe they do have multiple children, maybe they do have a lot of other things that they're trying to overcome in their daily lives. And so being able to give those hours and that time to be engaged, being an engaging board member can be a little bit more difficult and have more hurdles to get to that. So part of our goal and part of, again, going back to our original mission is actually truly creating the opportunities that people need to be able to serve on this board. So, but realistically and directly to this myth, the member doesn't have to be low income themselves, but you want to be able to show when you come out, you have folks come out and monitor, or you are the monitor coming out to say, they, again, don't have to be low income, but being able to verify not only were they democratically selected by individuals with low income, but that they're engaged with those networks and they're engaged with those groups of people on a constant basis because they are representing the voice of low income. And you want to be able to verify and show how they continue to engage. So whether that's maybe they volunteer somewhere else, maybe they do volunteer at the agency as well, and you see them engaged in those conversations. Maybe they're hosting town halls, maybe they're hosting public events. Throughout your community action planning phase, you have a lot of those community events where you're trying to get the voice of individuals of low income. It's making sure that that person's involved in that and they can articulate and explain what their role is on that board and how they bring that voice into governance on their behalf. And so it's ensuring that that's it. But again, to bust the myth, they don't have to personally be low income to have the value and to bring those lived experiences to the table. Myth number four, a low-income sector member must live in the exact neighborhood they represent. Now, when we talk about democratically selected, some bylaws will say, hey, we select members based on certain communities that we know are typically or at large, a lot of low-income members in these communities, and they'll designate different ones. Now, federal law itself does not dictate that they have to live in the exact neighborhood they represent. It does, however, say they need to be in the general geographic area served by the agency. So if you're an agency, let's say in Southern California, you probably don't need to be selecting board members that live way up in Northern California, right? They need to kind of be somewhat geographically in the area that is served. Now, however, a lot of agency bylaws and sometimes some certain state laws will dictate that differently. So you want to make sure and check with your monitor, with your representative, with the state office, which here in California is CSD, to see what they want to specifically say, what they are saying, make sure that that law is in writing and that you get that policy in writing if they're trying to say that to you. But also a lot of bylaws will state that. I worked for an agency for quite a while. In my previous agency, we actually had, we served one whole county and that county was divided up into 5 districts. The individual serving that had to live in that district. And that was because our agency bylaw stated that. Our board recruitment policy, that's what it stated. That's because we wanted that to make sure we had representation. But federal law does not dictate that they have to live in a certain neighborhood that they quote unquote represent. I want to bust that in. Moving on, myth number 5, nonprofit CAs must accept any representative a public official chooses. So we'll talk a little bit about this, and not just public, but that's typically where we see it a lot, where we get a lot of the questions, where I get an email, at least once or twice a year that says this public official, recommended this person. We don't feel that they're a good fit for our board, or maybe the individual is too political. The individual may have current situations within the community where they wouldn't be a good representation on the board. There may be some controversy. We see these type of things a lot, especially when you get into elections and you see things happen, or someone loses an election, or someone else wins an election, or some one in their own party opposes a certain thing, and so they become a little bit alienated in the community, and that maybe not somebody that it's going to help your board and help your agency on the public, public perception of your agency based on those folks, or there may be concerns from past issues with a certain individual. So nonprofits are not forced to accept an official. There is a great cap law, and it's linked here. And when we send out the slides, we'll make sure everybody can click on that link and get those kind of frequently asked questions on public officials. So the important part is here is that you do have a written policy, number one, as to how that vetting process goes. So typically, in most places, you will have an individual that may or may not be recommended, and the board and the agency itself reserves the right to say, we have these certain things. We have a background check maybe that we do. We may do financial checks. You may or may not do that part. But you may have you want to have something in writing that says this is our policy when people are nominated to our board. And at the end of the day, the board must formally vote to approve those. So let's say that you do have a representation that comes in that's nominated, the board votes to not select that person. Then the board wants to notify that public official that recommended it, said the board did not vote. That public official can petition the board to say they want very specific verification as to why that person was not voted in by the board. And if it's not resolved at the agency level, in theory, they can, or not in theory, in practice, you can actually petition the funder, which is CSPG, which for the state of California is CSD. So you would petition your state CSPG office to say, hey, I nominated this person to the board. The board did not select them. And then they will try to have an argumentary go into and make that selection and have a discussion about why that person is not there and kind of serve as that case. Same thing with the low income representation. I tell folks all the time, you want to be very clear as to what you're looking for, what you need on the board, what has to happen because of the board. More than often than not, especially even in the public sector, one of the issues that we'll see a lot of is that a public official will nominate somebody that gets selected on the board. They come for a little while and then they quit attending, and so the board has maybe a strict or should have a strict attendance policy. That individual has not attended over some time, and that becomes an issue because when you have your funder, the CSPG office come out and monitor, they'll come out and say, look, you've had this board member on this board for over a year and they haven't attended a meeting in a year or so, or they haven't attended a meeting in 6 months. We have a concern that that's not an active seat. And then you may go back to that person and say, hey, this person's not attending, we're going to remove that person from the board, and you have an issue. But the board reserves that right to say, well, we have to meet our governance standards, we have to meet the standards of attendance, and it's not happening. And so that, again, is an opportunity to petition to say, I still want that person to be nominated, and maybe that's an outside discussion. But the board remains that control to say, we don't have to just take anybody and everybody that is sent. And this is a big, big myth that we get a lot of questions about constantly on how to handle that. So I think it's number one, to be clear on this, is having a policy of how, what is your vetting process for somebody that's either nominated from the public or from the low income sector, and then being very clear and transparent as to if someone wants to oppose your decision as a board, that you have a policy in place of how you're going to handle that internally first, and then also being very clear that they can reach out to the funder if they disagree. That is, again, empowering individuals to say this board is controlled by the public in general and should be public facing and public driven. But we do reserve the rights because, again, we're holding a place of office. So we're holding the standards of governance for our organization. Next one, speaking of public, one of the other myths we get a question about a lot is a public official leaves office, their chosen board representative, is instantly removed. This is also false. The fact is really the federal law actually says that they must hold office at the time of selection. So obviously we have elections quite often, and that person may have been serving as a board of supervisor, or maybe they were the mayor at one point, and they recommended this individual, they nominated this individual, they were selected to your board, and maybe their board terms are 4 years, and they're only 2 years in, and that person leaves office, and it's like, wouldn't come and say automatically you're off this board, the new person is to appoint someone. You may choose to do that, but again, that is agency bylaws should be very clear into how you're going to handle that, and if you are going to require it. Again, you can do that. You can require that from an agency standpoint, but it's not required by federal law to say this person must be removed when their public official's not there. Now, that being said, if you have term limits and that term limit does run out, they can't continue to just reposition on that board. You would have to go back to the new elected official at that point, because at the time of the new term starting, they would not have been in office. And so again, at the time of selection, so it is a new selection, even though it's the same person, your own bylaws set your term limits and so forth. So you must go back to that individual at that time. And you want to, because the whole purpose of those public seats is being able to engage with whatever public office that you're working with, and that they're able to go back and articulate what the board's doing, what the agency is working on, and how that affects that public official's office and the engagement and the partnership that you have there. Another myth on board members: one board member can count toward two sectors at once. That's obviously false. We've seen this. And I know a lot of folks say, "Well, I've never done that." Well, it's happened. Folks say, "Oh, well, they represent individuals of low income, but they're also the appointee from this mayor or from that board of supervisors." You cannot do that. Everyone should have a seat, and you should be able to really document how they were selected to that seat. And if folks do transfer, and that does happen, maybe they were at one time selected as a representation of low income, but they've turned out of that position, but you still really enjoy this board member, so you want them to take a private seat at this time. Absolutely, they can be done. Or, you see it sometimes where this individual's done really good and the public official likes them and says, "Hey, I want to appoint them to my seat at this point." That can absolutely happen. But you need to be very clear exactly what seat. And again, as I mentioned when we first started, it's not only important that you have that board roster and that you're very clear as to where everybody is but that individual really needs to know what seat they sit in. So when you're getting monitored, or whether it's federal monitoring or state monitoring, that individuals ask, they'll have interviews and they'll say, "What seat do you represent?" You want to make sure individuals know, because way too often I do talk to folks and they're like, "Well, I'm not really sure what seat I'm sitting in here." And part of that's the rotation process. Part of that, again, is even having Cal Kappa come out and do, board governance training and having discussions with your board as well. Moving on. Bylaws are a one-time formality. Set them and forget them. So when an organization is formed, they typically have an articles of corporation, or they have could be a local, if they're a public entity, you'll have a local vote that'll set who that agency is, that advisory council is going to be to meet the community action, to meet the CSBG standards. That's what starts you. The bylaws are what's driven it, right? The bylaws are how you operate as a board. It's how you govern what are going to be your systems, the rules that you're setting for yourself to ensure that you, meet these CSBG standards, but also at the same time, allow you to know how to operate. And so when anybody new comes in, the bylaws are not that one-time thing. My favorite line to say all the time is, the greatest thing about bylaws is if you don't like them, you can change it. And they should be, right? Not necessarily change, but they definitely, actually under the CSBG organization standards, there should be a periodic review, right? Those should be reviewed on an ongoing basis, both by the board to ensure that those matter and they match and they actually are the way that you operate, and also by a board attorney as well, to make sure that you're following all California laws or all your state laws, or make sure you're meeting all the federal standards as well. So state code can change where you're at. Federal laws don't change, that haven't changed very often. But different information memorandums come out, things do change. There are different directions that can come out and say, we want to ensure this is it. All IMs or information memorandums are based off the CSBG law, and they have to follow that legally. But they do come out and sometimes offer an extended explanation around certain laws or certain things that they have seen across the nation. So it's important to make sure that you're constantly reviewing those bylaws. But most importantly, it's not necessarily about making sure it meets the law, but does it really work for you? And a lot of times we'll see, and just here recently, the agency says, we haven't changed our bylaws in 20 years, and this is what we're doing. And what'll happen is one or two things. Either A, those bylaws don't necessarily match what they want to be able to do, to whether it's seating the board, whether it's putting the board's rules and regulations in place, and or it's been so long that since they've actually really reviewed those, that we've kind of shied away, had a little bit of a drift away from that's actually what you're doing. So that could be a huge finding, it could be a huge issue. That's a big governance risk, because even your auditor is going to come in and say, here's what you say the bylaws, this is what you're telling us you do, show us how you do that. And if it doesn't match, that's where you get into an issue, and it creates a lot of risk for you as a board or you as a leader of your agency. Next is government-run agencies follow the exact same board rules as nonprofits. This is not true. This is a big issue that we face. Now, in best practice, it's great to empower that community action advisory board from a public entity as much as possible, as much as feasible. But while that should be preserved and the idea of community action and the thought and the process of it, they are typically going to act in advisory role. The final decision power, the making power of that is with that level local government body. So that's a very key thing to remember, because I do have this question a lot. Here in our state, California, we have 28 public entities that oversee, that have an advisory board. It's very important to remember that that contract is with either a city council or county board of supervisors, and understanding at the end of the day that those recommendations that are made by that board are finalized by that board of supervisors and how that occurs. Myth number 10, a long vacant seat is no big deal as long as we fill it eventually. So one of the key things is always making sure that you can document how you're attempting to recruit, but a long-term vacancy, essentially what it does is can again push that out. And especially once you get over to a whole year, a whole grant cycle, where you had a vacancy in a seat, that's where it becomes an issue, because at this point, even though you had the chair in the room, it's never filled. So therefore, you're not meeting the 1/3 statute that must meet for a whole grant cycle. And so that would say that you didn't have the balance of power at any point throughout the year, whether it's through the planning, through its implementation, through its making decisions on the finances. You didn't have that true equal representation because you had that seat vacant for over a year. The key to this is making sure that you're always recruiting and that you balance how you do that recruit. Again, it's always ensuring that you have people, you're always recruiting. It's like I say, always be closing, always be recruiting when you're talking about board members, knowing that when this person falls off, or if this person suddenly decides they can't make it, or something other tragic happens and you lose a board member immediately, that you have somebody ready to take that seat, to take that position. And so it's trying to show it. And the biggest thing around that is documenting your process, but it's not just enough to say we're trying. These are what we're trying to do. We can't fill the seat because there's not enough folks. That doesn't matter. That is a part of the contract that you sign, that you will have this tripartite board in place, and that people will attend these meetings. And I know in our state and across the country, this is another big target for the monitoring. It's making sure not only are the seats there, but that they're not vacant, but also that the people are attending as well. Myth number 11, the board just approves what staff bring. It's a rubber stamp. Always very, want to make sure it's important to understand, and it's not to scare off board members. I know we do lose a lot of folks because of different things, but the board does really carry that fiduciary and governance duties. At the end of the day, if the agency goes bankrupt, or the agency has a lawsuit, or if an agency has these issues, the lawsuit sticks with the board, and then that's usually where it's going to be named. They are held responsible. There's been situations where agencies have gone bankrupt, and they had staffing that they owed, they had contracts that they owed, and those individual board members may end up being sued in that sense. Now, the key part of this is making sure that as a board member or a leader, that you're always up to date on your directors and operators license. It's got insurance, making sure that's presented. Make sure you have a copy of that so that you can understand if certain things occurred, or if you are in a lawsuit, that you have that coverage to be protected. But it's important, most important is to educate folks on what their responsibilities, and so that everybody's clear when decisions are being made, that these are legal decisions and that these are legal issues. Whether you're talking about HR, whether you're talking about finance, all of those are actually have many and multiple laws across states and across this country that must be followed. And just saying I didn't know is not ever an answer that's going to get you out of legal trouble. So part of the stepping into that role, stepping onto the board, is making sure that you understand all the legal implications, all the finance implications, understanding the audits, understanding what the 990 says and what it means, and really honing in on those structures and those documents so that you can understand that you are lowering your risk by being on this board. Myth number 12, tripartite boards only oversee the agency's CSBG funded programs. So for many and most private nonprofits, the board is legally responsible for governance and the fiscal health of the entire agency. So while CSBG says, hey, you got to have this tripartite board and you meet these requirements, they oversee. If you are a private nonprofit and you are the top board of this nonprofit, you oversee all funding, you oversee all programs. In public agencies, it may be different. It may say these are the only programs, but when I come onto a board, if I was coming on the CSBG board, I want to know exactly what this board is overseeing. And it's actually encouraged to assign other programming to this low-income board, specifically if those other type of programs in a public entity are attempting to help achieve CSBG goals. A lot of times in the public agencies, we'll see where CSBG may get dispersed into other programming. And it's very vital that if that is occurring, that this board has access to what are those outcomes, what are those results, how is that money being spent in those other programs as well, even though they may not have necessarily, like I said, a governance, full governance position on those other programming because they're a public entity, but it is encouraged to allow them to be engaged so that it strengthens the partnership, it strengthens the collaboration among different departments in a public entity. But for a private, again, more than likely, they're going to oversee all programming. And so making sure that you're educating yourself on all the different types of programs that the agency operates and what are the responsibilities for those as well, and what are the rules and laws established for each one of those grants. Another myth, board members can vote by proxy or send alternates. We've seen this happen a few times. The federal CSBG Act does not explicitly allow proxy voting. It's actually typically frowned upon in that sense to make sure that the representation is there. And I would always make sure that whether a board can appoint an alternate or proxy, really it's going to be dependent on state laws and how that operates. So you want to make sure you're familiar with your state law and the way that it allows certain proxy vote, how often or how many proxies a single individual can take. And then, of course, your bylaws need to be very clear on how that's going to operate. How do you document the proxy so that you're not saying, oh, a certain board member has 2 proxies and there's no documentation that individual has given that individual their proxy vote. Making sure that you document that clear. Even here for us as a state association, we have typically a vote every other year. We are able to use proxies because it's limited. It's written in our bylaws, but it's very limited, and we have to be able to document officially how that proxy was given, and then we have complete a paper trail of that proxy as well. But it's generally prohibited in the community action agency level itself. Myth number 14. Agency staff can serve as board members. Generally, overall, no. Absolutely not at the time, because it's pretty basic in the sense is that it creates a conflict of interest. We have seen this, especially when you talk about the representation of low-income individuals. We'll have a lot of interaction possibly with a staff member, programmatic staff member in their day-to-day business, and they say this person really represents us and they have a voice for us. We want to elect this individual to also serve on the board. That cannot happen because, again, there's obviously a direct conflict of interest, and vice versa. An agency board member should not be voting on fiscal operations and then shortly thereafter become a staff. And we see this as well. A lot of times folks say, hey, I may be interested in that position that you have open. Your bylaw should have a very clear time frame in which that can occur, because you don't want to show where maybe a board member said, hey, we're increasing the agency budget, we're increasing the staffing budget by 10% across the board, and then all of a sudden they want to jump into one of those positions that benefited from that vote. So the time frame needs to be that they don't have a vote on anything that could financially incentivize them from moving from a board member to a staff. Also would very, very much encourage everyone to ensure and look at your policies and your board policies. Even in the bylaws themselves, saying what is the time frame from when a staff member can become a board member. A lot of times we've seen where a disgruntled staff member may leave under some negative circumstances and then start to petition different individuals to get selected as a board member on the board because they have an axe to grind. So you want to be very clear that if a staff member leaves, what is the time frame before they can become a board member? And you may have that different for different levels of staffing. I get it. A lot of times you have a long-standing staff member that left on good causes and they retired after a long period of serving, and you think they would be a great board member and they would be able to help. But making sure that you have that cooling off period between the two is extremely important. It keeps you from having a conflict of interest anyway along the way, but also to lower your risk as a board that you don't have a negative situation where staff are trying to come onto the board and change things. So, but according to this, we're talking about specifically is it's definitely not at the same time. Staff member cannot serve on the board at the same time. So myth number 15, low-income representatives cannot receive services from the agency at all. This is a big myth, and this kind of contradicts what I just said about earlier about funding and how things are going and they're making decisions. That at the end of the day, if someone qualifies, the majority of our program is based on income guidelines. And if an individual qualifies, they meet the standard. What you cannot do is give, obviously, a preference to board members and treat them differently. They need to make sure that you document that they went through the same application process for that programming, that they were not given, preferred treatment in that process, what it may be, especially if you have services that are very limited and are going to select a certain amount of folks. You want to make sure that whatever that selection process is that they qualify. If you're using a system in which it gives priority points, making sure those priority points are exactly the same for a board member and a non-board member. But we want to encourage individuals that qualify to apply for services, right? That's what we're here for, to empower them, to give them the resources. So just to bust the myth, it's they can receive services. It's just ensuring to make sure that they are not given any preferred treatment along. The myth, federal law mandates specific term limits. That is not the truth. The federal CSBG Act is completely silent on board terms. That is all to do with your bylaws and or if the state may have some things in place. So if your state does have certain rules about how long people can serve, you want to make sure and check with your state CCG office to see what those limits may be. But typically that is obviously written in your bylaws. You can be very clear as to how long the terms are, how many terms can people operate, how long can they serve overall in the board, and be very clear in defining whether that means only in one seat or they can transfer from one seat to another and start their term limit over. Just being very clear and transparent. But the federal law does not mandate any specific term limit. So if a monitor is coming to you and saying, well, that person can't serve that long, you need to get that in writing as to where that says that, because it definitely doesn't say it in the CSBG. So that we ran through quite a bit of myths there. I hope they were helpful. It's just kind of a little check-in. And speaking of that, a good, simple 60-second board health check is to run through these 6 items to make sure that you don't have any not sure's. And so, does your sector meet the 1/3 threshold is set? Can you produce documentation of the democratic selection process? This is the biggest issue we see. That folks say, oh, we have a process. So, well, let's see the documentation of that. So you want to make sure and keep that file on every single person that selected the board, exactly how they were selected, keeping up that backup documentation. And if it's an elected official that gives the documentation or that gives the recommendation, how is that made? Is it a letter? Is it official letters? It's simply an email. You want to make sure you keep a copy of that email, keep a copy of that letter in that person's file. So every board member, just like every staff member has an HR file, every board member should have a file as well and be able to document it. So if you do use an election process, what was that election process? And again, when you're talking about your democratic selection process, it needs to be every step of the way. How are folks nominated? Number one. Well, let me go back before that. How do you recruit, right? Being able to demonstrate. Maybe you post it on your website. Maybe you post it on social media. Make sure you keep a copy of those social media posts in that file to show this is how we advertise. This is how we try our best to maximize that participation among low-income people. Then the next thing is, here's our nomination. Here's the application that this person filled out. Here's our requirements. Those requirements are built on this policy. They were nominated and then they were selected by this group of individuals. So it needs to have signatures. It needs to be able to document that these individuals either met maybe in a town hall, or they had a caucus that they use, or maybe it is just an election process and we ran the election this many days and here are the people that selected this individual. You may use a petition process. So maybe you say, hey, you got to go out and get 50 signatures from low-income people in this community to be nominated for the board, having all that documentation. So again, first of all, it's having the policy written and that's clear, but also having the documentation that you follow the policy that you set. Do your current bylaws match how the board actually operates today? It's a quick check. Always running through that saying, let me just take a minute and figure out, is this the process that we're using? Are we doing this? Whether it's includes even the amount of times that you're going to meet, when you're going to meet, how do you announce those meetings to the general public, and or are you following all the laws that you set? Some individuals choose to put in more restrictive laws, making sure that those are in there and that you're following those. And if you're not, then it is time to have that bylaw review. Is every member assigned? Again, making sure, check your board roster. Do you have a board roster? Is it very, very clear? Does everybody have a copy of it on the board to make sure they know where everybody sits and can articulate that to funders and can articulate that to the general public as to how it operates? Other public official designations in writing. Again, you said this earlier, making sure that you can't just be like, hey, I like this person. I need to get a letter. Even if you have to draft that letter for the individual and get them to sign it, make sure that you have that official thing. So that lowers your risk if somebody comes back and says that person was never nominated, and or a funder or an auditor can't come in and say, well, you're selecting those individuals yourself and just telling people that they're serving for this public representation. And in accordance, if there are planned to fill vacancies before they break a 1/3 floor. So ensuring that that is done timely. Obviously, it doesn't have to be, an immediate turnaround, but what is the time frame that you're going to allow that to happen, and making sure that that's cleared from your funders. And that you have a plan to try to fill those vacancies so that you don't have too many meetings without a vacancy and businesses occurring with that seat being empty. Also remember, in our state, and you want to check your own state laws, is that if you're trying to meet quorum, the quorum is based on the number of seats, not just necessarily the number of individuals on the board at the current time. It is whatever your bylaws say. So if you have a board of 15 and your bylaws say that a quorum, which should be at least 8, then even if you drop down to 13 members, you still have to have 8 there to meet that quorum. Last slide is just a place where you can get more information. Again, we'll send these slide deck out, but these are some different areas you can always want to check. Again, the OCS information memorandums are all posted on the OCS website from the beginning of time, so you can go back and read any of those that you may want to. Of course, always start with the CSBG Act. We're here to help if you have questions. Again, that's the majority of the phone calls I get. I definitely will find, and if I don't have the answer, I'll definitely figure it out. Under the organizational standards, category 5 is where you find most of the board governance standards and how to operate those and what it is. And of course, your agency legal counsel. And then the last thing is, again, all this is not legal advice. This is being recorded, so you may be watching it later. This is not legal advice. This is simply a training and awareness tool to try to get there. So always make sure you seek your legal counsel, and please never say, well, David Knight said, and that will not hold up in court. So I'll tell you that for sure. Thank you for coming today. I'll definitely answer questions if anybody has any as we wrap up. We will be sending out a survey, so please fill that out and let us know how we did, and if this is information that's useful and you're able to use it in your everyday life. Do I have any questions before we close out? I guess I did a good job then. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the opportunity to always share information and have these conversations. So please let us know if there's anything else that we can do as well. So thank you very much and have a great day.